show, and we are live on Teachers Talk Radio. On tonight's show, we will be discussing something which is perhaps not talked about as much as it should be. My guests and I will be talking about anxiety and depression experienced by teachers and how these teachers can be supported.
Live from London, this is The Late Show with Naureen Khalid on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live on the Podbean app or desktop player. Just head over to www.podbean.com/LSW/TT Radio or search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TT Radio.
A very warm welcome to you all. Great to have you with me. This is your show, so do join in with me and my guests by calling in, by texting, or by using social media. If this is your first time tuning in, or you would just like to find out more, then please head over to our website www.ttradio.org. If you have thought about hosting a radio show of your own but didn't know where to start, then our website has details about how to get in touch with us. The team will be delighted to hear from you, and you may become our latest host with a show of your own. Those of you who have listened to my previous shows, and thank you for doing so, will know that I usually divide the show into two parts and discuss two topics with my guests. Today's show will be slightly different. I am being joined by guests, but I will be discussing just the one topic, which is anxiety and depression experienced by teachers. This is a very important topic, but one which sadly doesn't get talked about as much as it should. It seems to be a bit of a taboo subject, and there seems to be a bit of stigma attached to it. This is why I wanted to not only have this as tonight's topic, but devote the whole show to it. If you are listening in and would like to share something or ask my guests some questions, then please call in or text. If you want to share something anonymously, then please DM me on Twitter. I'm at 5Noreen and my DMs are open. I will read out what you DM, but without naming you. So grab your cup of coffee or tea and enjoy the next hour and a half. Before we chat to our guests, let's first head over to the news desk where Gail Glenn has the latest educational news for us.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
This is your latest Teacher Talk Radio news with Gail Glenn. The Delta variant is driving a surge of COVID infections. A 70% spike among children aged 5 to 9 has resulted in widespread absences in primary schools. COVID has now taken hold firmly in schools, contrasting effects during the first wave. According to Public Health England, there were 148 outbreaks linked to educational settings in the week up to the 20th of June, and this was a jump of 54% from the previous week. The government is said to be seriously considering extending the vaccine rollout to pupils to help prevent the virus incubating in schools. Aberdeen Standard Investments has teamed up with Winning Scotland and Making Maths Count to provide a fun way for children to boost their numerical skills as part of the 2021 Scottish Open. The initiative aims to help encourage greater enthusiasm for maths amongst children, parents and carers, and the wider public. Sponsors have sent education packs containing maths challenges and tasks relating to golf and the Scottish Open to primary schools across Scotland. The resources are also available to download online. As part of the project, pupils are being encouraged to enter a competition which will be judged by mathematician Dr. Hannah Fry. Dr. Fry, an ambassador of the project, said, "All children should be able to approach maths with confidence, and it's important to transform the mindset that influences our perceptions of who can and can't be good at maths. You may not think it, but golf is full of physics and maths, so it's great to see Aberdeen Standard Investments and Winning Scotland use that to help young people understand that maths is a creative and engaging subject with many transferable skills. The Scottish Open is held from the 8th until the 11th of July. Jeremy Miles, the Welsh Education Minister, has outlined plans for the return of education after the summer holidays. He is quoted saying, "Our guiding principle has to be a move towards education being enabled to operate as normally as possible in the autumn. Currently, all education settings follow national guidance. However, as we move through the pandemic, there will be a need to move to a more localised approach rather than a blanket approach. To enable this, we will publish a national framework for each education sector, which will support them to escalate and de-escalate interventions based on risk. The framework will set out a range of safety measures depending on the risk category based on low, moderate, high, and very high risk categories. The frameworks will allow escalation or de-escalation of measures, such as testing, the use of face coverings, and social distancing. It will apply to schools, colleges, and universities. Mr. Miles said that advice would be taken from a number of sources, including public health and the Chief Medical Officer. This has been your daily education news briefing.
Live from London, this is The Late Show with Naureen Khalid on Teachers Talk Radio.
Good evening. It's just after 8 o'clock on Wednesday, the 30th of June. I'm Naureen Khalid, your host on The Late Show, and we are live on Teachers Talk Radio. On today's show, we will be discussing something which is perhaps not talked about as much as it should be. My guests and I will be talking about anxiety and depression experienced by teachers and how they can be supported.
Live from London, this is The Late Show with Naureen Khalid on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live on the Podbean app or desktop player. Just head over to www.podbean.com/LSW/TT Radio or search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TT Radio.
Welcome back. For the next 45 minutes or so, we will be chatting to my guests, Ellie Crovato and Steve Waters. Ellie is already in the studio. Steve, you need to ring in and then I can admit you into the studio. Um, and what? Oh, there he is. Let me just let him in. And later on, we will be joined with by Peter Riley. So I'm just waiting till Steve joins in. There he is. Lovely. Um, Steve is an educational consultant and founder and CEO of Teach Well Alliance. He has qualifications in mental health and coaching and is a founding fellow and elected council member of the Chartered College of Teaching. He's also co authored the book on doing your research project. Ellie is a science RQT in Kent. She is the team transition science lead and an Oxford science contributor. Welcome, Steve and Ellie. It's great to have you with us.
Hello, hi.
Hi, Steve. Um, we were going to have another guest, Kay Dean, join us today as well. But sadly, Kay has tested positive for COVID and isn't feeling too good. She messaged me that she would still try and join in if I needed her. Obviously, I told her that her health comes first and she must rest and take care of herself. Kay very kindly emailed me some of the stuff she would have talked about if she had been able to come. I'm going to be reading from her email throughout the show with her permission. Kay, if you're listening, then all of us at Teachers Talk Radio are sending you really warm wishes and we hope that you recover quickly and fully. And I'm especially grateful that despite not feeling well, you've emailed me your thoughts. Thank you. So, Steve and Ellie, welcome. Why is it important that we talk about teacher anxiety and depression? Who would like to go first on this?
I'll
Steve,
go first.
go on then.
Um, so, anxiety and depression are two elements of what has been called burnout.
Okay.
And burnout is much more than just tiredness, which is which can be pretty debilitating in itself. Um, but burnout is complete mental and physical exhaustion. And teachers who've developed burnout say that they get to a point where they just can't carry on. And sadly, some of them get to that point in the middle of a lesson, have a breakdown, or just can't continue. And the warning signs will have been there for some time. So, what is often missed in depression is that it's often accompanied, or mostly accompanied, by anxiety. Because when you get depressed, you then start to worry about the things that you should be doing that you can't do. And it's a vicious circle. So we need to talk about teachers' mental health in all its facets. And we need to enable teachers to start to admit when they get to a point that they recognize that either anxiety or depression or both is going to head them into burnout if they don't either change their patterns of workload or, in some cases, leave the school altogether. Most of the schools that I work with are wonderful, but there are a sizable minority of schools which produce a very toxic environment where the level of care for teachers is very poor. And it's in those schools that we see most evidence of burnout, and teachers wanting to leave or having to take time off due to stress.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Ellie, what about you? Do you think it's important for us to talk about anxiety, depression, burnout in teachers?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, lovely. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, because there's far too much stigma still attached to mental health in general. And teaching is a very, very demanding job. I I am a career changer, as lots of people know, and I think that teaching has been the one job so far where there are so many plates spinning at any one time that it's very easy to get down a bit of a slippery slope. Um, but there is like a bit of a martyrdom. I don't know if that's the right word, but we tend to sort of like not speak about it because we are expected to be all in when we teach. And so I think that's important that we recognize that we do have an issue, as in other jobs, but we do have an issue because of the demands of the job itself.
That's very true. And I think teachers, especially, as you said, they have loads of plates spinning in the air at the same time, but
Yeah,
they don't like to drop any of them.
no,
And if
no,
no, and if any of the plate do drop, it's usually their own home life and their own health, and
yeah,
that just makes it worse, and that makes it even more difficult to hold the other plates up in the air.
yeah, it's true.
Mm.
And yeah, it's I just, for me, it's just about mainly and foremost trying to end the stigma around speaking openly
Yeah.
about poor when mental health becomes an issue, essentially.
Thank you. And that's why I'm really glad that I've had you and Steve and Peter later on, and Kay, who would have joined us if it hadn't been for COVID, speak about this, because I too feel that it's only through speaking it that we normalize these conditions. Nobody feels ashamed about talking about being diagnosed with diabetes or a broken leg, and this should be the same. It's just another illness which needs to be dealt with sympathetically. um, Kay had, like I said, Kay's emailed me stuff. She said that she's given me permission to read it. She's said, talked a bit about her own anxiety. And she says that always have had anxiety. I remember being 7 years old and being terrified of school. I wasn't bullied. I had friends, and by all accounts, I should have enjoyed school. But every day I woke up with dread, scared something would go wrong, like I'd forget my ruler or I'd accidentally do something that would get me told off. So I made myself sick with worry, sometimes physically. My attendance was really poor, but I still achieved as I'd do my work at home. My mum cared, and when we had a meeting at the primary school with the head teacher, he implied I must be a troublemaker to be so worried about being told off. But that's not very helpful, is it? I think things have changed now in the 15 years since I left primary school. At least I hope so. I didn't realize I had anxiety until I was in university and it got too much. I thought it was normal to be scared of upsetting people, to be scared of something going wrong, and feeling dread. But since I have had cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and taken my daily prescribed antidepressants, I know that it doesn't have to be like that. You don't have to live that way. I've gotten much better to the point where I've been a teacher 3 years now, although my mental health is something I have to be very aware of. It can easily slip if you don't monitor it, just like your physical health. So, Ellie, does any of that sound familiar?
Oh my god, yeah. Yeah, I remember having the anxiety problem in my secondary school, especially I think, yeah, the equivalent, because obviously my schooling was in Italy, the equivalent of year 9 onwards.
Mhm.
I used to absolutely dread school for a number of reasons, and I remember I had some investigations done because my stomach was very poorly, and I had cramps and all sorts of things. And I am fairly convinced that it was kind of as a result of being anxious about just everyday life, really, in general.
Mm, thank you. Steve, did this sound familiar to you when you with the teachers you've worked with and the teachers you've helped? Does this account seem familiar that anxiety was there? Wasn't really recognized as anxiety. Some of the, like a case head teacher wasn't, they just said it must be you and you must be doing something wrong. Does that sound familiar?
Um, well, it sounds familiar in terms of my own experience, which is remarkably similar on the face of it to the one we've just heard, because I suffered with depression, anxiety, and at one stage quite severe OCD, although I didn't recognize it as such. And that started when I was about 14. And since working in the mental health area with all sorts of people, with teachers, age 14 is when the first signs of mental ill health begin, which is year 9.
Mhm.
And I don't think that we take sufficient note of that. Pastoral care in this country is usually excellent, but I think we could be better informed about the onset of mental ill health at that age, and also how to recognise that a child is having is having problems, is struggling. And that, I think, is where first aid for mental health comes in, and the more that we can train ourselves to recognise the signs, the more that there's a chance that we can get some intervention. Although, having said that, the CAM service is woefully under-resourced, and sadly, children who sometimes present with some quite severe symptoms of mental illness have to wait an inordinate amount of time before they can see someone from CAMS. My own son experienced some difficulties fairly recently, about 2 years ago, and the GP said that he should have some CBT, and the waiting time was 12 months.
Oh my goodness.
So you can imagine that if you wait for 12 months with a mental ill health, it's just like not treating yourself if you have a physical illness. It just gets worse. So, we were in a position where his mum was able to afford to pay for private CBT, and within 8 weeks, he was almost better, and within 3 months, he was totally better. But I shudder to think what would have happened if she hadn't been able to afford that, or we hadn't been able to afford that. Yeah, so the problem with not being treated in adolescence for a mental ill health disorder is that it in most cases, it doesn't just go away. It gets worse. And in my case, it presented again with three severe episodes of depression when I was teaching. And then when I was working for a local authority about 15 years later, I had a severe breakdown and had to spend 3 months in hospital. And it was only then that when I was in hospital that they diagnosed that actually it wasn't only depression. There had been a pendulum swing from depression to elation, and that I actually had bipolar disorder. Now, the fact that I was in hospital in a secure unit meant that they could try a combination of medication and talking therapy, and we managed to get a combination of medication that has worked ever since, and I've not had a repeat episode, and I've been very well since. So the consequences of not picking this up in childhood can be very severe in adulthood. Fortunately, the schools I worked in were very sympathetic, and they did everything by the book to support me. But I know from experience with teachers and just seeing conversations on Twitter that there are some pretty awful examples of teachers who are suffering from mental ill health, being judged that they can't cope, that they're just not up to the job, and statements like, well, perhaps teaching's just not for you, are made. And you can't make a judgment whether teaching is for you if you're suffering from a mental breakdown. You have to get well first, and then take a more objective look with support. And I'm just reminded here of Victoria Hewitt's book, Making It as a Teacher. And it's a wonderful book. She is very honest about her own experience, where in her first school, she came to a standstill in the middle of a lesson. She was suffering from burnout, and she just burst into tears, and she couldn't return to the classroom for a long time. And while she was off with stress and being treated, she decided that she wanted to leave teaching because she thought that she just couldn't cope with it. And someone said to her, well, why don't you just try one more school? You know, take the opportunity while you're not teaching, while you're recovering, to take a good look around at the schools in the area and, you know, make a list of the schools that sound good and that you would be prepared to apply to. And that's what she did. She applied to another school. That school was totally different, very supportive, and she's still teaching 6 years later. In fact, she's running the history department.
Oh,
So that is how important it is that leadership understands mental health and also knows how to give support and is prepared to give it. Because for all sorts of good reasons, not least that we could be losing some excellent teachers. You know, that's one reason. Another reason is that if your staff are absent for a protracted period, then it's going to affect the children's progress. It obviously affects your budget. And if you're spending money covering somebody who's ill, who could have been carrying on teaching if they've been supported, it really is throwing money down the drain when you could have been spending that money supporting teachers and putting in a culture of mental health and well-being, which is what I advocate.
Tom Rogers has just messaged in. He says some very good points here, Steve. And I was thinking that you would never ever think of telling someone who's been diagnosed with diabetes and who's still in the process of adjusting insulin doses, etc., and had to take time off, that teaching wasn't for you because you've got diabetes.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
it's not under control at the minute. So why do we say that to somebody who's suffering a mental illness as opposed to a physical illness? Why not give them the time um, to recover and then make the decision when they can mentally be in a space where they can make it? Ellie, you said that you were in Italy as a child. So you've had experience of Italy as well as here. Which country do you think deals better with it, with mental illness in a slightly better way? Or
Oh
are we
gosh. Here, I think
really okay?
it's just that from a school point of view, we've got some outstanding pastoral care here. I mean, obviously, I turned 49 yesterday, so I'm not spring chicken.
Happy birthday!
Oh, thank you. It was an eventful day in a number of ways, but never mind. So you have to consider that when I went to school, there was no such thing as being mentally ill. That's, just get on with it. That's you being silly. Get on with it. Even though I used to be physically sick in the morning, and then just as with Steve, things kind of spiral from that point. So eventually, when I was diagnosed, it led all the way back to that point in probably year 10, going into year 11, where the idea of exams just got to me completely. I had a complete breakdown. I did very poorly in my exams, but I had zero support when I was in school. I was given some tablets for bad stomach, and that was pretty much it.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, in my case, obviously, then much later on, there was also a diagnosis of autism, which obviously kind of adds to the whole picture. So there was that at some point, but I had absolutely no support at all. And when I think of the amazing teams that I've seen in many schools that are day in and day out, the the rock of some of the children that we teach is just amazing to have that. Even though we're stripped to the bone, is still amazing.
That is good to hear. That we hear all the really horror stories, but it's good to hear some good stories as well. We are going to take a small break for the news, but when we come back, I'd like to ask your opinions on what pressures or situations in school can lead to teachers feeling stressed, and how does that affect their work there. So think over that while we break for the news.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
This is your latest Teacher Talk Radio news with Gail Glenn. The Delta variant is driving a surge of COVID infections. A 70% spike among children aged 5 to 9 has resulted in widespread absences in primary schools. COVID has now taken hold firmly in schools, contrasting effects during the first wave. According to Public Health England, there were 148 outbreaks linked to educational settings in the week up to the 20th of June, and this was a jump of 54% from the previous week. The government is said to be seriously considering extending the vaccine rollout to pupils to help prevent the virus incubating in schools. Aberdeen Standard Investments has teamed up with Winning Scotland and Making Maths Count to provide a fun way for children to boost their numerical skills as part of the 2021 Scottish Open. The initiative aims to help encourage greater enthusiasm for maths amongst children, parents and carers, and the wider public. Sponsors have sent education packs containing maths challenges and tasks relating to golf and the Scottish Open to primary schools across Scotland. The resources are also available to download online. As part of the project, pupils are being encouraged to enter a competition which will be judged by mathematician Dr. Hannah Fry. Dr. Fry, an ambassador of the project, said, "All children should be able to approach maths with confidence, and it's important to transform the mindset that influences our perceptions of who can and can't be good at maths. You may not think it, but golf is full of physics and maths, so it's great to see Aberdeen Standard Investments and Winning Scotland use that to help young people understand that maths is a creative and engaging subject with many transferable skills." The Scottish Open is held from the 8th until the 11th of July. Jeremy Miles, the Welsh Education Minister, has outlined plans for the return of education after the summer holidays. He is quoted saying, "Our guiding principle has to be a move towards education being enabled to operate as normally as possible in the autumn. Currently, all education settings follow national guidance. However, as we move through the pandemic, there will be a need to move to a more localised approach rather than a blanket approach. To enable this, we will publish a national framework for each education sector, which will support them to escalate and de-escalate interventions based on risk. The framework will set out a range of safety measures depending on the risk category based on low, moderate, high and very high risk categories. The frameworks will allow escalation or de-escalation of measures such as testing, the use of face coverings and social distancing. It will apply to schools, colleges and universities. Mr. Miles said that advice would be taken from a number of sources, including public health and the Chief Medical Officer. This has been your daily education news briefing.
Creative Resources, made for teachers by teachers. At Creative Resources, we've been rethinking what a classroom can be. We've created a huge range of more than 2,500 original and exciting resources that span across more than 15 different subject areas. Whether you're looking for primary or secondary level resources, careers options, PSHE, arts or humanities, Creative Resources have the resources for you. We offer full curriculum packages and unique, challenging escape rooms themed on topics such as Shakespeare, Tudors, and fractions. We have quizzes, task cards, Tarsier puzzles, and lots more. Better still, more than 100 resources can be accessed for free. Just visit our website www.cre8tiveresources.com. You can get 10% off any order you make on our website by using the discount code TT Radio. Creative Resources, made for teachers by teachers. Live from London, this is The Late Show with Naureen Khalid on Teachers Talk Radio.
Good evening. It's Wednesday, the 30th of June, and I'm Naureen Khalid, your host on The Late Show, and we are live on Teachers Talk Radio. Tonight, I have with me Steve Waters and Ellie Sovato. Steve, Ellie, and I have been chatting about an important topic: anxiety and depression experienced by teachers and how to support them. A little later, we will be joined by Peter Riley too.
Live from London, this is The Late Show with Naureen Khalid on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live on the Podbean app or desktop player. Just head over to www.podbean.com/LSW/TT Radio or search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TT Radio.
Welcome, everyone. Just before we broke for news and for the ads, we were discussing anxiety and depression, how it manifests itself, and experiences in Italy, in England, and why is it important to recognize this and to treat this. The next question I'd like to pose both of my guests is: what pressures or situations in school can lead to teachers feeling stressed, and how does this stress then affect their work? Ellie, do you want to go first?
I think for me, it's those demands that are made of teachers without a why, and they escalate into what then becomes a tick boxing, box ticking rather, that's Italian in the exercise, which adds to the workload without any benefit to the children or to the teacher teaching. So those things that take a lot of time and certain types of marking, running detentions at the end of the day, calling parents and emailing all sorts of people to coordinate things that are hard work after a full day of teaching. So for me, the workload, especially when it's not justified, is one of the problems that I've seen in those schools that I would possibly call toxic in a way.
Yeah. And that probably affects your work. So it becomes a vicious circle, doesn't it?
Yeah,
The more toxic it gets, the less
yeah,
good work you can do, which makes you more stressed, and therefore you can't even do what you were doing before.
yeah. And there's a lack of support in certain schools where, as I was mentioning before, you can't really, you're supposed to just get on with it, essentially.
Yeah.
Unless you're really unwell and you're physically unwell, everything else doesn't matter, or it doesn't appear to matter anyway.
So Steve, what pressures in schools can lead to teachers feeling stressed?
4 hours on without a break. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it outside the school.
Mm-hmm.
high stakes accountability is destroying teachers and destroying schools, in my opinion. Jeremy Hannay, who am I still live?
Yeah, I can hear you.
There's a lot of noise on the line somewhere.
Yeah.
So Jeremy Hannay, who's head teacher of Three Bridges Primary School in Southall, London, has contributed a chapter to the book that as I've written and just been published. And he has abandoned all forms of high stakes accountability. So there are no lesson observations, there's no book scrutiny, there's no marking policy, there's no learning walks, there is no performance management. And he's been very outspoken and in saying that in this country we've been sold a lie. And the lie is that in order to raise standards and get results, you have to monitor, criticise, judge and inspect. And he bravely put his head above the parapet, made these statements, and some of his colleagues said, well, that's all very well, Jeremy, you know, it all sounds really good, but what happens when Ofsted visits? And Ofsted visited, and his school got outstanding in every category. Now, that example, strangely enough, has not been used by the DFE to draw people's attention to how to run a school. But because he's removed all the high stakes accountability measures and replaced them with professional development exercise, which are in the control of the staff, he has very few absences. Nobody wants to leave his school. And when he was recently appointing additional staff, because of the rise of pupil numbers, he had an inordinate number of applications. And his school is in an area of high deprivation. 89% of the children speak English as a second language. So it's not the case that he's in a leafy suburb by any means. And in not looking at his school as an example, what the government are doing and what Ofsted are doing are basically carrying on the, as he calls it, the lie. And that lie is causing a third of all early career teachers to leave before the end of their fifth year, most of them leaving within the first 3 years. And it's causing teachers to burn out, to want to leave a profession that they once loved. And so many teachers are getting to the age of late 40s, early 50s, and feeling that they just can't carry on teaching. Not because they don't love teaching and they love the kids and they love their subject or they love teaching in a primary school, but they physically can't manage it anymore. And that really is a tragedy, because we've got people who've devoted their lives to teaching, maybe going straight from school to university to being a teacher, and they've got so much experience to offer, and they could be working alongside younger teachers and sharing strategies and enabling them to become a good teacher themselves. And they just want to leave. They just want to get out before it, you know, they believe, before the job kills them. And I think at the root of it, and we mentioned martyrdom previously, is the imperative that children must come first.
Yeah.
And on the face of it, you would say, well, of course, why wouldn't that be the case? Surely that's why you're a teacher. The problem with that is that if that means that the staff come last, then the staff won't be able to care for the children and they won't be able to teach effectively. Jonathan Glazard of Edge Hill, he's professor of community education, has done he did a study where he interviewed primary school children. I think they were year 4. And what he was looking for was a relationship between the teacher's stress and the pupil's stress. And what he found was that we often hear advice such as, well, look, if you're not feeling great, just put a smile on your face and, go in there and do it. He found that when the teacher was stressed, even though the teacher was attempting to cover up for it, the pupils knew within 30 seconds of that teacher walking in the room what mood they were in. And we're talking about year 4 here. Now, once the pupils picked up that the teacher was stressed, they then started to get worried about their teacher. And they wanted to do their best work because they didn't want to make their teacher's stress any worse. And that put them in a situation where they were becoming stressed. And the more the pupils became stressed, the more the teacher becomes stressed, and then it goes into a vicious circle.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, so there's a case for not covering up, but being authentic with the children and saying, last night I only had 3 hours sleep because my baby woke every 2 hours and, wanted to be fed. And this is now the 3rd night running and I'm really tired. So, if I'm a bit irritable, then I hope you'll understand, but I'll do everything I can not to be. And then that gives permission to the children to say the same thing to their teacher if they're not feeling great. Yeah. So in sharing what is, after all, a human experience, we encourage open dialogue in the classroom rather than attempting to be something that we're not at that particular moment.
That's really good points. Thank you, Steve. We've got Peter Riley, who's just joined us. He's in the studio as well. Welcome, Peter. Peter is a history teacher who is just coming to the end of his 2nd year of teaching. He says he loves music and football, so he must be having a good few days right now. He says he's a huge nerd and a scouser who longs for home. Peter is starting his training to become a mental health first aider. Welcome to the show, Peter. I'm glad you could join us.
Good
First,
evening.
what a win for England, hey? Good evening.
It was,
good evening.
but to
Hello.
be brutally honest, as a Scouser, I see myself as Scouse, not English. So I'm watching it, but I'm a neutral.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's fine. So, what pressures or situations do you think in schools which leads to teachers feeling stressed?
I think part of it is the fact that you just can't switch off from it. So I'm sure I speak for most of the people who are listening and pretty much everyone you've spoken to recently as a teacher, when you will have woken up at some point in the middle of the night thinking, oh God, did I print those worksheets for tomorrow? Or one of my kids seemed a bit down in the lesson. I hope they're all right. Or have I got all my lessons planned? All that kind of stuff. It's stuff you just can't switch off from. I've tried, and it doesn't happen. I think because we do tend to put too much on ourselves, because that is unfortunately a part of the job. I mean, we're not just teachers. We are, in some cases, to some children, some extreme cases, surrogate parents, like social workers, role models, all this extra stuff. We don't just deliver knowledge to them.
Mm.
We model how to be adults, how to behave, how to grow up, how to mature. All of these things that aren't explicitly taught to them. I think the pressure of trying to be the best role model that we can be is quite a big one because it's something that's not really spoken about very often. You know, people always talk about marking, and obviously that is very stressful, and data and all this kind of stuff. But I think all the rest of the stuff that comes with it can have quite a big impact on us as well.
True, true. Um, like I said before, Kay was supposed to join us today, but she's come down with COVID. She very kindly sent me some of her notes, which she was going to use during the program. She says that actually teaching in the classroom doesn't cause her anxiety. I think it's because it's something she loves and she feels in control of. What anxiety does affect is all the other stuff. At her school, they have to phone home to parents for every detention they set. Sometimes you don't know what response you're going to get. Oftentimes, parents can be hostile or just argue with you, and that really sets off my anxiety. I put off doing these phone calls at all costs. It fills me with dread, and I hope that it goes through to voicemail. What works though is to fully plan what you're going to say and what you'll say if they argue. I also treat myself to a cup of tea after my phone calls. Other things like whole staff emails, where there are passive aggressive comments and gentle reminders in quotation marks of non negotiables. And my anxiety keeps it circulating in my mind that it was obviously directed at me, even if I haven't done what they are reprimanding people for. To overcome this, what I do is talk it through with a colleague or even my partner at home. A technique I learned in CBT is to make two lists. If the criticism is true, what can you do? And if it's not, having a clear, concise plan of action of your worries really helps and keeps you from spiraling. The thing with my anxiety and depression is that if I don't keep on top of it, it can quickly spiral. So, like a bad lesson with pure behavior, a negative phone call with a parent, an email that seems critical can all mount up. You can feel like you're trying so hard, but it's never good enough for kids, parents, other staff. So, it's really important to keep it in check and your mental well being strong. And I had received a Twitter DM, something along the same lines. She says, another thing is email etc. In emails etc. Don't just say I could do with seeing you for 5 minutes. Say what it is about. I will assume the absolute worst case scenario and stew about it for the whole day. And the other thing is really, this one is quite interesting. I also got forced to do a whole staff well-being day recently, and it genuinely made me have a few proper breakdowns. What is
Oh
yeah,
dear God.
what is
Forced to
fun
do
social
well-being.
activity for one person might be hell for another.
Oh my goodness,
We can
that's
all relate to that, can't we?
oh my gosh,
I
honestly.
saw on Twitter recently a teacher tweeting about their school doing after all the fiasco with the tags,
Mhm.
doing in inverted commas well-being day for teachers where they were forced to partake in physical activity like egg and spoon race and the sack race and stuff like
Oh
that.
my
Oh
god,
my god!
I can't imagine anything worse. Oh my gosh,
I mean,
no,
Like
I
that might be great for some people, but
no.
exactly. I mean, I don't have anxiety as generally, but if I was told to do a staff egg and spoon race, I would. And that's yeah. Um, right. What we've talked a lot about what goes wrong in schools and why teachers end up being stressed and get suffer from anxiety. But what does good mental health support for teachers actually look like?
so I recently during Eid had a mental health day off.
Hmm.
Um, my school's majority Muslim, so I figured that was the best time to do it because even with all the focus on mental health and the emphasis that's been adding, it's getting more focus as we go on. Um, there's still that sort of the inbuilt teacher guilt to having a day off.
Yeah.
Aside from anything else, the feeling that you're letting people down, or the kids, or your colleagues, or the people who have to cover for you, that it's the extra work that you're going to have to face when you come back. But I was really lucky because I went to one of my SLT, just told them, like, listen, I'm struggling. Most of our kids aren't going to be in tomorrow. Can I take the day? It was a couple of days before, sorry. And he went, yeah, that's fine. I, I'll sort out the forms. I'll do it all. Consider it done. There was no process. I didn't have to fill in the forms. I didn't have to request it. I just asked him, had the conversation. It was done straight away.
That,
Um,
yeah.
in my school, we've got some systems to reduce teacher workload, which make our lives better. So we do centralized detentions. So SLT do all the detentions in our school. We have year 7 detention, year 8, year 9, year 10, 11, etc., in different zones of the school, all run by members of SLT. We use a website where parents automatically get a text or email notification if their student gets to detention,
Yeah.
which means we don't have to do the phone calls. We don't have to do the detentions if we set them. Um, the marking policy is not lax, but it's not some of the ones I've seen where you have to mark every book once every 3 weeks, or one of those kinds of things. It's just checking their books once in a while, make sure they're keeping up. Because to be honest, most of the time you do it during a lesson anyway, don't you? When before COVID, you're walking around the room checking they're doing the work as you're going through the lesson.
Thank you. That sounds really good. Ellie, have you got any examples of what good mental health support looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of this is why I think I'm going to stay where I am forever because I think that's where just people listen. In my case, it's people listening and people just saying, "Tell me what you need so I can make it better."
Mm.
Just simple things like, "How are you?" and meaning it.
Yeah.
Meaning to ask the question and offering to help or to support. I've got kind of a red card that I can use. For example, if I feel that I can't quite handle a specific situation and someone comes to my rescue, it's kind of little things like that, but they make a huge difference. And this is why we need to be open and honest and talk about it. Because if I
Yeah.
didn't, then I would be kind of struggling on my own.
Yeah, I was about to say that it doesn't have to be a really huge big thing.
No, not
Even
at all.
little things can help. One of the DMs which I received is that the biggest thing people can do to help me is to understand that I need to ask a lot of questions and get
Yeah,
details. I am not being a pain or
yeah,
judgmental of plans. I just need to know what's going on.
yeah,
So that's just a little thing. Just take 2 minutes to explain, or take 2 minutes to answer the questions, and the person goes away feeling satisfied, and the anxiety levels drop down.
yeah.
Yeah. We had a message which was going back to what the well-being there is. The message says, "My favorite is the staff managing work-life balance (CPD), which is scheduled at 6 p.m." So, Peter, you're, I believe, training to be a mental health first aider.
Yeah, well, my 2-day course starts tomorrow, actually.
Lovely. Oh, best of luck for
Nice.
that. What
Thank you
made
very
you?
much.
What's involved in the course? What is a mental health first aider, and why did you go for this course?
Um, I mean, I don't know exactly what's involved to the best of
Hmm.
my knowledge. I mean, I haven't really been told much about it. I just heard the phrase mental health first aider and thought, yes, I want to do that. It's basically, I mean, it's the same as a physical first aider. It's just for mental health instead. Just if someone's having a crisis, you can help and learning strategies to help. And sometimes it is just listening, and sometimes that's all you need.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's knowing who to point them to. Sometimes it's knowing just the right thing to say because you can't solve the problems. But sometimes just knowing people aren't in it on their own is enough to get them through until they can get some more long lasting help. The reason I wanted to do it is because I've had since I started my PGCE, I've had some. I was diagnosed with depression, anxiety in my PGCE year,
Mhm.
which, as you can imagine, is not the best time to start dealing with that. And ever since then, I've had sort of episodic bouts of depression. I'd probably describe it as, where and when you're teaching in a school all day, and at first, when I first started at the school, I was quite sort of suffering from imposter syndrome, basically. So you feel like you're not necessarily doing enough to earn your place and earn your pay and that kind of thing. And so I didn't want to admit that I was struggling with mental health issues necessarily. Um, but as time's gone on, I've realised that honesty is absolutely the best policy.
Mm.
Because if I can be honest about it, as I think Steve said earlier, if I can be honest about it, the kids can be honest about it.
Yeah.
So the reason I'm doing it is just so I can. It's not even about setting a good example or being a role model or any of that. It's just about trying to help.
Thank you. Well, best of luck for it, Adai. You must come
Thank
back
you.
and tell us what it was all about and how you found it.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Steve. You've got some qualifications in this field, haven't you?
Yes, I'm a mental health first aid instructor.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm also a qualified counsellor.
Uh-huh.
Um,
You probably could tell Peter what the course involves then.
You're not doing a course tomorrow, are you?
No. It depends. If it's Mental Health First Aid England, it differs slightly from the course that I deliver, which is an Ofqual regulated course at level 2. It's a very new course. And what's interesting about it is that pupils age 14 and over can also do the qualification and get level 2. But generally, the framework is that you are not there to solve somebody's problems. You can't do that. They have to solve those problems themselves. But it's important that they know they've got someone who they can talk to and who will listen and who will understand. And we mentioned earlier about most mental health illnesses start at the age of 14. So if teachers can begin to recognise when a child is beginning to suffer from mental ill health, then there's a better chance that intervention can happen so that they don't become an adult who has never had any intervention and the mental ill health becomes severe, which is typical of what can happen. So a lot of the mental health first aid is understanding the symptoms which accompany different mental ill health conditions, and being able to just take a look around the classroom as the children work and perhaps see things that you wouldn't see if you hadn't been trained. But it is very much like physical first aid. You know, you're not going to treat someone with a broken leg. You're not qualified to do that. But you remain with the person, you listen to them, you reassure them, and then you point them in the direction of help. And in severe cases, for example, where someone tells you that they are thinking of ending their life, then you would call 999, just as you would if there was somebody who needed urgent medical attention who was in danger of dying. So the two are very similar in some respects, but obviously different in others. And just being able to recognise that something is not quite right and open a conversation and allow a pupil to start to talk to you in a way perhaps that they've never done before is such a valuable skill.
I'm just struck about again and again about how much is common between physical and mental illnesses where people don't realize that. Now, again, with any physical illness, be that heart disease, diabetes, cancer, the earlier you catch it, the better chance you have of of treating the person. It's cheaper to treat that person, and the same with mental health. The sooner we can recognize symptoms and get them the help they need, the better it is in the long run. So, do you
Yes,
agree?
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think what is important, of course, is that mental ill health can lead to severe physical
Mm-hmm.
ill health.
Yes.
And stomach complaints are common in people who are suffering from mental ill health. So we're not wired to have different experiences. As soon as we become mentally unwell, then our body starts to respond. And one of the key factors for teachers is that if they're suffering from chronic stress, which is unrelieved and relentless, that drops their immune response, and they then become much more susceptible to physical illness. And we all know that happens, for example, it's probably happened every term since COVID started, but in ordinary times, the autumn term is really hard, and people get to Christmas thinking about having some welcome time off and with the family, and of course Christmas is not a relaxing holiday, particularly if you've got children who are hyper and excited, and then you get to the holiday and you're suddenly ill yourself. And it's just that your body has been running on adrenaline, and as soon as you stop, then your immune system can't cope with it.
Uh, this takes me to my next two questions, actually. Very good segue into those. First is, should staff be given time to recover fully if they've had a mental health episode before the sickness policy kicks in?
Well, that's an interesting question.
Mm.
I can't see how that would work. Only in the process itself.
Yeah.
Because once you've been teaching for a certain length of time, you have 6 months full pay, don't you?
Yeah.
And then 6 months half pay. However, it's up to the school. The school can decide that they're not going to trigger that 6 month process until maybe a week or two into the illness, and that can help. But I think the important thing is that if people get proper support in school and they get proper support outside of school, and that's not always the case, then they need to be relieved of the anxiety about what might happen in the future. And so you need to start talking about one day at a time, not, well, you've been off for 3 weeks now. When do you think you're coming back? Which I've heard.
Mm-hmm.
And also, when you are ill and you are signed off, you are ill and signed off, and you don't do any work.
Yeah.
And again, I've heard so many cases where people have been emailed for cover lessons, for end of term reports, for entering data, for marking exams, and so on. And if you were lying in a hospital bed, with cancer, you wouldn't be going hopefully to that person and saying, "Oh, do you mind just writing your reports?"
Yeah.
And again, it's almost like saying, well, okay, you're off with a bit of stress, but I'm sure you could get round to doing these reports if you really tried.
Yeah.
And all that needs to happen is that parents need to be told that the teacher is ill, and those reports won't be written.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You
So
wouldn't.
it's, we're talking. So as Peter was talking about the guilt, if the if the school acts in such a way as to trigger that guilt and almost tries to make you feel guilty because you should be doing something that they think you should be doing, then that's not going to help your recovery. It's going to make it an awful lot worse.
Very true. Very true. Again, an example of a physical illness. A PE teacher with a broken leg would never be asked to demonstrate how to run across the field. So why, she or he will be given time. Right. I'm going to take a small break, an ad break, and the break for the news. And when we come back, we'll go to my next question.
Every teacher loves stationery, right? Imagine getting a selection of fun, beautiful and unique stationery items designed and selected especially for teachers, delivered through your door every month. You need to check out teacherslovestationery.club.
I'm always so excited when the box arrives. It's such a treat.
My Teachers Love Stationery Club box is just a little treat to myself every month.
It's always full of delightful and surprising items, including some really good quality stationery brands like Faber-Castell and Stabilo.
And because you never know what you're going to get, it makes it even more fun and special when you get it.
It feels really great to be supporting a family business that's run by real teachers. I can't help feeling like they just know what I'm going to enjoy using stationery-wise better than I do myself.
Visit teacherslovestationery.club and enter the code TT Radio when you buy your first stationery box to save £2 today. teacherslovestationery.club. This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
This is your latest Teacher Talk Radio news with Gail Glenn. The Delta variant is driving a surge of COVID infections. A 70% spike among children aged 5 to 9 has resulted in widespread absences in primary schools. COVID has now taken hold firmly in schools, contrasting effects during the first wave. According to Public Health England, there were 148 outbreaks linked to educational settings in the week up to the 20th of June, and this was a jump of 54% from the previous week. The government is said to be seriously considering extending the vaccine rollout to pupils to help prevent the virus incubating in schools. Aberdeen Standard Investments has teamed up with Winning Scotland and Making Maths Count to provide a fun way for children to boost their numerical skills as part of the 2021 Scottish Open. The initiative aims to help encourage greater enthusiasm for maths amongst children, parents and carers, and the wider public. Sponsors have sent education packs containing maths challenges and tasks relating to golf and the Scottish Open to primary schools across Scotland. The resources are also available to download online. As part of the project, pupils are being encouraged to enter a competition which will be judged by mathematician Dr. Hannah Fry. Dr. Fry, an ambassador of the project, said, "All children should be able to approach maths with confidence, and it's important to transform the mindset that influences our perceptions of who can and can't be good at maths. You may not think it, but golf is full of physics and maths, So it's great to see Aberdeen Standard Investments and Winning Scotland use that to help young people understand that maths is a creative and engaging subject with many transferable skills. The Scottish Open is held from the 8th until the 11th of July. Jeremy Miles, the Welsh Education Minister, has outlined plans for the return of education after the summer holidays. He is quoted saying, "Our guiding principle has to be a move towards education being enabled to operate as normally as possible in the autumn. Currently, all education settings follow national guidance. However, as we move through the pandemic, there will be a need to move to a more localised approach rather than a blanket approach. To enable this, we will publish a national framework for each education sector, which will support them to escalate and de-escalate interventions based on risk. The framework will set a range of safety measures depending on the risk category based on low, moderate, high and very high risk categories. The frameworks will allow escalation or de-escalation of measures such as testing, the use of face coverings and social distancing. It will apply to schools, colleges and universities. Mr. Miles said that advice would be taken from a number of sources, including public health and the Chief Medical Officer. This has been your daily education news briefing.
Live from London, this is The Late Show with Naureen Khalid on Teachers Talk Radio.
Well, welcome back.
Tipex. Yeah. What's a Tipex?
The white stuff. Hello, hi Ali.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. That's all right.
I thought I was on silent. I'm so sorry. Oh my God, honestly.
That's okay.
It was bound to be me. It was bound to be me. If there was one, oh God.
That's okay. Yeah, so my next question, which sort of follows up from that, is I came across a message on a teacher support group on Facebook the other day where a teacher was asking if anyone else felt anxious on Sunday nights. Does that sound familiar? Is anxiety you experience different at different points of the week or school year? Ellie?
It's the Sunday, it's the Sunday dreads, isn't it? It's I've always associated it with you not liking your job. You know what I mean? It's Monday and you're going back to work, but actually it's just, I think it's what part of what Peter was saying before, of there's a new week and you don't, yes, your lessons are planned, but okay, what if they're not exactly planned the way they should be planned, and what if something goes wrong, and what if something happens in school? For me, it's kind of like I love the routine of school, but I still get Sunday dreads regularly. Even though I'm all planned, I'm all set, I'm all good to go, I still, the afternoon of Sundays, start getting a bit, where I get, I start hyperventilating basically. And and I think that's, for me, I think this is quite a common thing, that Sunday into Monday is probably the worst night's sleep overall.
Peter, what about you? Do you find anxiety different at different parts of the points of, during the week, during the term, during the year? I can't. Hi, Peter. Can you hear me?
Hello, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
I can now.
Sorry. So the only time I get anxiety, so to speak, is around observations, because my first NQT observation was an absolute nightmare. It was my worst behaved class. just after a very, very rain-filled break time. 4 of them had been involved in a fight. Another 4 had been involved in egging it on. All 8 of them were in my lesson.
Oh,
The lesson that I had meticulously planned, they'd already done because there was a shared class and myself and my colleague had got our wires crossed about who is teaching which module. So I open up the PowerPoint and then I said, "Oh, sir, we've already done that." My colleague who was observing me left 15 minutes into the lesson to take one of the students to the internal exclusion unit and didn't come back. The only positive feedback I got was, "At least you know all the names."
yeah.
So every time I get an observation, or even if I hear that, like because in our school the head is very open, is very keen to he takes visitors around the school most days,
Mhm.
and the open door policy, you could get someone popping into your lesson anytime. It's obviously it's not designed to create anxiety. It's
Yes.
designed to foster drop-ins, sharing a good practice, all that kind of stuff. But it sometimes can have the opposite effect.
Yeah.
So if I know, for example, the CEO of the trust's coming round, then I'm kind of glancing at the door every couple of minutes in my lessons, just in case she happens to show up in that couple of minutes where we end up chatting about what they did at the weekend or the football instead of the Tudors or the Normans or whatever.
That's speaking from a governance point of view. Maybe you could tell us. I mean, we have to go as part of a role. We have to go into school to to monitor stuff. Um, re- Good governors, effective governors know that we are not supposed to be there for lesson observation. We are not supposed to make any comment or make any judgment on the lesson being taught, on the teacher teaching the lesson. We're just there to see whether students are engaged, if a new scheme has been uh, brought in, how is that working, how is the behavior around the school. But do you think is there anything we can do to reduce any anxiety which may uh, occur if governors walk through your rooms?
To be honest, I think there's nothing that I can think of because I think it was Steve was saying it earlier, like the solutions for these or dealing with this has to come from the person who's going through it
Yeah.
because the governors, the trust, they've done everything they can to do that. They are very explicit in saying there's no judgment attached to it.
Yeah.
We're just we're just showing people around, or we're just having a little look around to see how things are going. There's no judgment or assessment attached to it. It's just because a couple of times last year as well, I had the CEO of the trust bringing someone round while we were watching a video. It was in the 5 minutes of a lesson that we were watching a video, and they came round to see other kids watching a screen instead of writing and talking to each other and learning. It's just little things like that that have kind of made me a bit anxious about people coming into my room in the lesson if I didn't know they were coming.
Ellie,
That's
anything you
very much a me thing though. Sorry, carry on.
no, no, that's fine. Ellie, anything you want to say to governors listening in? How can we help reduce anxiety when we come around?
I think again, I'm I've got like a great example where I am now, and then I've got a horrendous example of where I've kind of come from,
Yeah.
and I think it's just supporting what the head is trying to do and what the senior leadership team are trying to do with regards to being, open and honest and transparent with the staff and the school community in general. So I've seen our trustees before. We're a board of trustees at the moment, and I've seen them before coming around the school and just having a visit. And to me, that's kind of like, I don't know, the obvious thing to do, to be properly involved in the life of the school and in supporting this kind of this open communication about what goes on and what all of the good stuff that we can do to
Mhm.
support one another.
Okay. Well, any governors listening in, I hope you're taking notes, and I hope you do make it clear that when we go in, our job is not to do a lesson observation, not to make a judgment on the lesson being taught, not to make a judgment on the teacher teaching that lesson. That's not governance. Um, Kay, the teacher who's emailed me her stuff who was supposed to be on today, she said, talking about anxiety worse at certain points of the year. She says that this year has been awful in terms of mental health. The uncertainty, the extra expectations, and the worry of getting sick, and of course, the isolation from colleagues and support. In general, I would say that the last few weeks of every half term is just so tiring, and normally the time after January to March, when the weather is poor and the pressure is ramped up for GCSE results. So yeah, that's something when you're the general public, when you think of exam results, you think about pupils feeling the pressure of results. But actually, teachers must feel that pressure as
Mm.
well, wouldn't they?
Yeah,
Mm.
we feel the responsibility for it, obviously.
Obviously, yes. Right. If there Now we're sort of coming to the end, we've got about last 4 minutes left. So I'd like your thoughts on if there was if there were heads listening in, SLT listening in, line managers listening in, what would you say to them? How can they help teachers cope with the anxiety? And secondly, do you know of any what sort of support can teachers tap into? Who would like to take this biggie first?
I think one oh sorry, go on, Steve.
No, carry on. That's fine.
I was just saying, I think one thing, or a couple of things teachers, as leaders could do is, instead of like a token well-being day once a year and thinking that ticks a box, there doesn't need to be some big grand gesture of, for today you can get a free lunch or whatever. A focus on well-being throughout the year makes a much bigger difference and makes it feel like it's prioritized and valued. So telling your staff that they don't need to stay till 4 or 5 o'clock every day. Staying later doesn't mean working harder. Trusting staff as well to do what they need to do and know what they need to do. Because working at a school where you feel trusted and valued makes you more confident in yourself and is massively beneficial for your mental health and well-being.
Thank you, Steve.
Well, I was just going to say exactly what Peter has said, that well-being is not a one-off initiative or even a set of disconnected strategies. It has to be built into the culture of the school. It has to be so embedded that every decision that's taken that affects staff is taken with a view to answering the question, is this going to make staff, is this going to increase staff workload, and is it going to make it more difficult for them to do their job? And if the answer to either of those questions is yes, then the decision should be very carefully considered before continuing with it. And in terms of support, the charity education support is a 24-hour, 365-day-a-year helpline, and it's staffed by trained counsellors. And in certain situations, they can also provide free longer-term counselling. And I know a number of teachers and teaching assistants, anyone really who works in a school, who got to the end of their tether. They found education support really helpful. And I would suggest that that number is up in the staff room and in other places around the school, so the teachers are aware of that sort of help.
Thank you. Mabel just texted in saying, here on year-round focus instead of a one-off, which I think we all agree on. Ellie, any thoughts from you on this?
No, all I want to say is that what Peter and Steve have described is essentially what happens where I am, where there's a very open dialogue and a constant focus on well-being. I think for me, when he kind of I finally realized that I was in a different place. I went to a meeting an afternoon, which was part of our transition meeting, and the SLT organizing the meeting apologized for actually organizing it outside school hours, which was essentially after like 3:15 in the afternoon. So for me, that was kind of the point where I realized that there is another way of doing things, and that's the way that essentially Peter and Steve described.
I mean, this is really good that we've heard very good examples and of best practice from Peter and from you and Steve as well. But and anybody listening in, if you're in a position to change the culture in your school, do take these examples on board and see if you can do it. Kay has said that if I would recommend that if you're feeling dread, anxiety, recurrent stress or low mood, that you do speak with your GP, and that is true. Seek help. As don't be shy, and don't think that it doesn't matter, that you can get over it. It's or you're just imagining things. If you're feeling low, do speak to your GP. They are there to help you. Um, and they can suggest therapies or even medications. She says the waiting lists are very long, so in the meantime I would suggest speaking with your line manager, family and friends for help. You matter more than the job, and if you're not well, then you need to focus on you. And I think the last thing which she says, and I think that's a really good thing to end on the show on, is it really is common, and you truly aren't alone in this. And I think that's a message I would love for people to take from this show, that firstly, anxiety, depression, any mental health issue is just like any other physical illness, so don't treat it differently. And secondly, like I said, you aren't alone. There are lots of people in the same position as you. So speak to your doctor, speak to your line manager, and hopefully you can get some help and support which you need, and get it in a timely manner. So thank you, Ellie, and thank you, Steve, and thank you, Peter, so much. This has been a really fascinating call, and I hope it has made some people realize, things about what teachers suffer when they are suffering from anxiety. And I hope that even if there's one head or one SLT or one governor who thinks, hang on, we probably shouldn't be doing what we've been doing, then I think this would be a great thing.
Yeah.
So once again, thank you so much, and I will now let you get on with your evening. Thank you for taking the time out to join us on Teachers Talk Radio on the Late Show with me today. Thank you, Steve, Ellie,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Peter.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
lovely
you.
evening,
Bye-bye.
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you. Good night. Bye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.